This video is sponsored by Incogni, the simple solution to protecting your personal data. Check out the link in the description to get 60% off an annual Incogni plan, or stay tuned to learn more. Buses, trams, subways, high-speed rail. All different transportation modes which can serve different journeys and form the backbone of different transportation networks. But I think there may actually be one transit mode which does truly stand above the rest in its cost effectiveness, flexibility, and quality of its transit service. And the world is sadly appearing to turn away from it, for reasons which I cannot imagine are good. Let's talk about it. What do Rotterdam, Los Angeles, Istanbul, Guadalajara, and Edmonton have in common? Besides being rarely discussed in terms of their public transit, even if they maybe should be, especially Istanbul. You can check out my video about it here. Well, as it turns out, they all owe a lot to Frankfurt, Germany, and its rather unique U-Bahn or subway trains. To understand how they came about, we need to look at a bit of history. Originally, or in Toronto until like 5 years ago, trams used to be big vehicles with high floors and stairs that you would climb up to get into them. And some of these vehicles would even have a bend in the middle and an extra set of wheels so that they could be bigger and carry even more passengers. And these styles of vehicles were actually quite universal around the world. Now, in the mid-20th century, with the subway building craze in full swing, some smart people realized that these high-floor trams could be repurposed for use on subway systems. Sure, they were narrow, but the subway trains in Paris and London are also narrow. They simply needed to drop the steps and make it so that multiple trams could be brought together to form longer trains. And like that, the trains for the Frankfurt U-Bahn were born. Not long after this, a number of different cities in North America were looking into building rail transit systems for the usually second time. Systems such as Calgary and San Diego. And honestly, the rest was history. This style of high-floor tram-derived subway train was adopted all over the world, from Istanbul to LA to Rotterdam, and in many more places. And despite the interesting tram-derived design, these trains are even more interesting for what they actually enable in terms of transit service. And to see that, one only need look at Rotterdam Line B. This particular service starts in the northeast of Rotterdam, where it operates sort of like a SkyTrain style service, before descending down to street level and running along side streets in a railway corridor with level crossings. But these are fine because they're located in relatively suburban neighborhoods with not a ton of density, the trains are short, they're pretty fast, and they don't come all that often, every couple of minutes or so. Now, as the line continues towards central Rotterdam, it combines into a single trunk with Line A, and then it operates alongside a large boulevard with less level crossings because the blocks get larger and larger. Continuing south, the line merges in with another branch, in this case Line C, and from this point on, the lines are grade separated. In fact, the junction with Line C is a flyover. Running into the city center, and beneath it, the line is a subway with tons of service from the various different lines or branches. But on the other side of the city center, the services pop above ground once more, go elevated for a bit, end up back in a rail corridor, and then eventually start going on with level crossings once again, at high speeds of up to 100 km per hour all the way to the coast. If you want to learn more about this wacky transit system, you can watch my Rotterdam Transit Explained video. The point here is that a single transit mode or vehicle can operate as a light regional train, a subway, or a tram. And even along a single line, it could do all of these different things. And they managed to have some unique benefits in doing this over modern trams and traditional subways. Compared to modern low-floor trams, the high floors of these vehicles give them a flexible interior layout. People can easily roll around mobility devices, but seats can also be placed inward-facing for a more high-capacity subway-style layout, or front and backwards, so that people can be comfortable for longer journeys. They can also be chained together into longer trains, up to around 130 meters in Edmonton, for example, which is actually decently long even for a regular subway train. And as you see in Rotterdam and Amsterdam, the trains can even be set up to pick up power from a third rail, so that they can operate in subway tunnels that are quite constrained for headroom. But that of course wouldn't be appropriate for low-floor trams where you have passengers very close to the rails. Even better, the vehicles tend to be inexpensive to maintain because they're a lot simpler in design than modern trams, where the bogies are crammed in under the body shell. And that simplicity also means that basically any train company can build them. At the same time, unlike traditional subway cars, these city trains, which is what I'll call them for the rest of the video, can go across grade crossings because they're structurally designed to be able to handle potentially an impact from a bus.
among other safety features that make them appropriate for operating in a sort of mixed traffic environment. The vehicles also offer engineers and planners more flexibility with the route. Because of their tram origins, they can wind tighter corners and climb up steeper slopes. Now, with that said, why don't we see more systems like this? Well, for one, the technology didn't really emerge until the middle of the 20th century, and so that means a lot of the oldest legacy subway networks around the world already had decided on a sort of subway standard. And for most of the large cities that built subway systems afterwards, well, it probably made sense to go for high-capacity systems, since generally the cities that build subways, at least historically, have been pretty big. At the same time, smaller cities often just went with trams, often because they probably were never going to need much, if any, subway tunnels. Karlsruhe in Germany is a good example of this. There is a city center tunnel, though it isn't super long, but because there's so little tunnel relative to the size of the network overall, it makes sense to optimize the vehicles for the surface parts of the network, i.e. having boarding from a low height where you can board from a curb, rather than optimizing the vehicles for tunnels with higher floors. Of course, the general point here is that when you already have a rail system, you're probably going to stick with the standards of that rail system. And especially if you already have subways and trams, you might not have a ton of reason to build a hybrid system. At the same time, most new rapid transit systems today are being built in giant cities in the global south, and they need all the capacity they can get, and so these trains aren't really appropriate. But then there are a lot of cities in the middle, in places like the United States and Canada that don't have large rail systems, if they have rail systems at all. And for them, I'd say city trains are a pretty awesome solution. And that's a big part of why light rail probably took off in North America. But the thing is, over the years as more and more light rail systems were built, they kind of whittled away at the great features that were originally included in the Frankfurt U-Bahn, and often for bad reasons. The tunnels started to get really expensive, so they went, and the high-floor vehicles weren't necessarily aesthetically pleasing and didn't necessarily feel all that modern, especially when you look at videos of cities like Paris with all of its modern low-floor trams, so they also went. And yes, I have actually sat in a planning meeting where someone said, we need a system that looks like it's a European-style system running through the town center with low-floor trains, so that is a real issue. Ultimately, that meant leaving North America more or less with standard trams, but with strange right-of-way designs. But maybe the most special element of city trains, and why they're still such a good option for medium or small-sized cities to adopt, is their ability to evolve. You can start with a system like the Lausanne M1, with lots of single-track operations right next to streets and level crossings. Then work your way up to something more like Calgary, where the whole network is double track, you have slightly less crossings because there are some tunnels and elevated guideways, and you start to put together longer trains. Then you might consider adopting the higher speeds of Los Angeles or Rotterdam, so you can start to serve far-flung suburbs or even rural towns. And this can actually be practical because you can build single-track lines and they can operate fairly infrequently, with level crossings. And then someday maybe you end up building a city center tunnel, like Edmonton or like Los Angeles' recently opened City Train Tunnel. Eventually you might end up with a full subway line that's completely separated from pedestrian and car traffic and might even have branches, like Istanbul M1. You see, Istanbul and Lausanne are nothing alike as cities, but they both have a line called M1 that uses shockingly similar trains, in completely different right-of-way environments. Essentially, the city train is a transit mode that you can really grow into. And their flexibility lets you build a single coherent transit network that could solve all kinds of different transit problems with one single transit technology, especially good for the economies of scale it can offer smaller cities. People often seem to think that I think automated metro trains are the best kind of transit, or at least some sort of Swiss Army knife. But if I were to pick a favorite, it would probably be the city train. And hilariously, while I don't think it's happened yet, there's no real reason that a fully grade-separated city train route couldn't be automated, which would just make it an automated light metro. You can see this Swiss Army element in Rotterdam. Not a small city, but also not a megacity, where the system serves beaches, is a subway in the city center, and even has level crossings in lower density areas. I think on a dollar-for-dollar basis, it's some of the best transit you can buy. Because while an automated metro is great, a lot of the time, if you're running a low-frequency service with small trains, you can operate it at grade with level crossings, but that's not something you can do with an automated metro, at least not today. But of course, these are the exact things that make a project less expensive to build and mean it might actually become a real thing, rather than just a figment of a transit YouTuber's imagination.
Now, for something that might just be the figment of a transit YouTuber's imagination, a day blessedly free of any spam, robocalls, or emails in another language telling me I have a package I need to pick up or an overdue bill that's definitely from the tax collector. It's rendering my phone's actual phone functionality almost useless, and my voicemail is constantly full, which means people that actually need to reach me aren't able to do so. I, like what I assume are most of you, spend a chunk of my day on the internet, and through regular usage of the internet, my personal information is constantly being collected, purchased, and sold to data brokers, which is how they got my phone number and contact information in the first place, not to mention any other sensitive personal information they might have from me. But this is soon going to change because of Incogni. By simply creating an account and giving Incogni the permission to do so, they can find all the data brokers that have my information and request their removal. And they follow up on these requests to ensure objections from data brokers are dealt with and the whole process is followed through. Incogni also ensures your personal data stays off the market by doing recurring automated removals so that you can stay safe throughout the duration of your plan. And best of all, everything is automated, so there's no need to check in or do any manual interventions, you just need to watch it work. Incogni also knows all about different geomarkets and laws from around the world, so whether you're under the Canadian Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, or the European General Data Protection Regulation, it'll be able to deal with anything that comes up. Use code RMTransit at the link in the description to get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan, and everything is risk-free with Incogni's 30-day refund policy.